there is a famous sort of Jeff Bezos truism where he said people are always asking, what's going to be new? What's going to be different next year? And I ask, what's going to stay the same?
Well, hello and welcome back to CISO Tradecraft. And today I'm going to be interviewing Merritt Baer. She's got a law degree from Harvard. She spent over 5 years as the Deputy CISO at AWS. And we're going to be looking at a year in review, but not last year, but this upcoming year. So stay tuned. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. But before we get going with our show, a quick little note. Do zero-day exploits and supply chain attacks keep you up at night? Well, worry no more and harden your security with ThreatLocker. Worldwide companies trust ThreatLocker to secure their data and keep their businesses' operations moving. ThreatLocker takes a deny-by-default approach to cybersecurity and provides a full audit of every action, allowed or blocked, for risk management and compliance. Onboarding and operation is fully supported by their U.S.-based Cyber Hero support team. Get a free 30-day trial now and see how ThreatLocker can help prevent ransomware and ensure compliance. Visit ThreatLocker.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is G. Mark Hardy. I'm your host for today, and we are going to be talking about the future of cybersecurity, at least in the upcoming year or two. For anybody who's been doing this for a while, we realize you can't see 5 or 10 years into the future. Things change just way too much, but it's a pretty good idea to kind of look at what's coming up going forward. By the way, things that are coming up, something you might be interested in, is a event called CruiseCon. For CruiseCon, it's going to be departing out of Port Canaveral on the 8th of February, coming back on the 13th. There's going to be a number of senior CISOs that are out there, some top-level speakers, and even Mike Rogers, the former director of NSA, will be the keynote speaker out there. So I will be there. If you want to catch up, I'd be happy to spend a little bit of time and see with you. And because Mike's there, I will not be the senior officer president afloat, in spite of all the Navy stuff in the background. And so hopefully that'll be something that you folks out there will find interesting. Anyway, back to Merritt. Thank you for taking the time to be on the show, and welcome to CISO Tradecraft.
Hi, yeah, happy to be here. I'm coming to you from Miami, where I'm on Tuskegee, Miccosukee, and Creek land, among others, and happy to talk all things CISO today.
Awesome. So mention a little bit about your background. You had spent over 5 years as the Deputy CISO for AWS. I'm thinking like you still have hair and it's not all white or gray or falling out like mine. So how do you do that? I mean, what's the secret?
Yeah, it's interesting. Working in the security shop of a large, mature organization is obviously its own like beauty, and it's also its own challenge or set of challenges, especially because folks forget that like AWS is a tech company just like any other, like they are a vendor. They are, they've convinced everyone that they're the air you breathe. And in a lot of ways it's this like invisible infrastructure that feels, seamless and on demand, but we work really hard at that. And as you can imagine, as a security team, you're doing a lot of work behind the scenes, not just to secure the infrastructure of your own environment, but also to ensure that customers are securing themselves, are building securely. And those are actually separate but related propositions.
Yeah, and it's interesting. A lot of times we think of as a CISO being responsible for the infrastructure security as compared to the security of the client's data, which seems to sort of kind of, go into a different direction. But at the end of the day, when you've got something that's as extensive as AWS, you really have to kind of concern yourself that there is, more than just what's in front of you. So how do you, with over 2 million, however many customers, I don't know what the numbers are. I suppose I could look them up, but a huge number. Let's just use it with that. That way, not getting thinned down. How do you manage to keep that infrastructure secure without a steady stream of breach, where I'm sure there's always somebody poking at the edge and they said, hey, we got in there. And the reality is maybe they got like a little corner of something that's not terribly valuable.
Well, so even your question belies the problem that most folks have with cloud, which is that they don't register in a meaningful way the shared responsibility model distinction.
Right.
So what I was really tasked with is making sure that we are secure ourselves and that we're building products that are inherently secure. So as you know, the traditional cloud model goes up through layer 4, the hypervisor. And of course, with Nitro that came out in I think we publicly talked about it in 2017. We had made an acquisition in 2014 that underpins this. And this goes back to like the, chips and silicon. We built our own silicon. The ways that like a lot of cloud is actually a hard, heavy lifting on the cloud provider side. So everything from guards and gates up through, the traditional model for like an S3 or an EC2, your basic units of storage and compute would go to layer 4. But of course, actually, it's much more nuanced than that, because in services which are increasingly managed, then AWS is owning more of the security of that stack as well. And I think, having customers not just build and design securely, but be able to understand which parts they own. That was one of the challenges. And it was also just an interesting CISO relationship with other CISOs, because they would usually land on my calendar because their account team said they, need it like unblocking as a relationship, or because they don't believe that we're really encrypting this. How do we demonstrate that to them? Or they don't believe that we're or don't have attestations enough about how we're demonstrating good security practices. And so I would give them that information and kind of catch them up on the CISO to CISO. And then they would have this moment where they would go, well, you're a security shop and you run on AWS. What are you doing around? And they would, whatever they were trying to currently do, right? It might be just like creating a seamless experience for trouble ticketing that is, low latency and API driven, and where robots increasingly resolve them. It might be, how to do forensics in the cloud and keep the right amount of life cycling with your data policies. It might be GDPR or new AI regulations. Like, a lot of it was actually empathy. Like people talk about empathy as if it's like, oh, I feel bad for you. It's like, no, I can relate to you. We are going through this too. And a lot of times the answer is, yeah, we work at that too. And here are some things that we have found that work better than others.
Yeah, now you'd mentioned the AWS shared responsibility model. And for those who are familiar with it, basically Amazon says we'll take responsibility for security of the cloud, but the customer is responsible for security in the cloud. So things such as the hardware, the global infrastructure, as you say, the guards, the badges, the dogs with rabies to keep the attackers out,
Yeah,
etc.
of course. They got to get them all with rabies, preferably. And it's not just AWS, right? This is true for all cloud providers. And it is true. Now, this led me, so I'm currently the CISO at a young company called Rico that does SaaS security. So securing all the applications that are, telling you about all the applications that are in your environment. People usually have like some, Microsoft Word document that they're like, I think this is it. By the way, this is actually a very cute note from my daughter that says, Mom.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, they think this is it. And actually it's orders of magnitude more, because folks are building modularly, right? They're not necessarily having to construct every little piece that's in their environment. They're vending it to themselves. So you're going to have a CRM, you're going to have, you're going to have a payroll, you're going to have a whatever. Any enterprise is going to have a constellation of apps, and now AI too. And there will be co-pilots, and there will be, just so many different things that are within their own environment. And there too, the shared responsibility model is true, which is that when Snowflake has a breach, they're going to say, that wasn't a breach. That was them targeting your environment. They got into you. They didn't get into us. And that's how I think we're going to continue. We were going to talk about sort of patterns and behaviors that we expect to see, or just like insecurities that we can expect in 2025. And I think this will continue to be one, which is that, old-fashioned security might be like making sure your VMs are plugged in and your, like power sources on. Now we've abstracted away and we are building modularly, even when your code writing agents are great. And I'm not convinced that they are right now. But even assuming that would be the case, that's not usually the way that folks are actually getting in your environment. It's through the front door. They're using valid credentials that you didn't lifecycle appropriately, or they're getting in lateral you through, non-least privileged behaviors, or you've left something open to the internet. Like it's behavioral based and it's about access patterns. It's not going to be something that is like they're burning a 0 day every time.
You'd mentioned something in passing that I wanted to focus in on, and it's really forward-looking in a way. We're talking about shared responsibility models, but you'd mentioned the term AI shared responsibility model, and I haven't seen anything out there yet. Maybe there is one, but I think that's going to be an area of development to say, where are we going to go ahead and share this responsibility? Where you mentioned something like a Copilot or Anthropic's Claude, or even using the good old ChatGPT, which most people, it was their first introduction to an LLM. Of course, you have now custom models and things such as that. I was looking at one company's product yesterday where they've taken ChatGPT, because I could just tell by the way it was interacting. They put a layer on top of it and they said, hey, this is our app and you can lease it for X dollars per month and it will help you do all these different things. And really what it's doing is generating these canned queries, these canned prompts that they have thought out with over time, that once you seed it with the right information, it then gives you very useful output. But then I asked something such as that, like, what's your cutoff date for information? Well, April of 2021. All right, I'm in cybersecurity. Things change every 18 months. Half of what you know is different. And so maybe it's less useful for me. But what do you think about the idea of an AI shared responsibility model? And then where do we start to draw that line or lines between the hosting company, perhaps the AI company that has generated that model, and the actual customer or the user that's creating the prompts and putting them in?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually drafted a framework for secure AI use that is going to come out from Oxford University Press soon. Online. Don't worry, we're not waiting for the printing presses to hit. But I got like 60 CISOs in a room recently, and we threw darts at it. If folks are interested in an early version, if you are a practitioner, you can reach out to me. I will send you my messy Google doc, and you can take it and start using it if you find it helpful. But yeah, you're right. There will be concerns around. I think you touch on a couple of things here. Reliability, like how much can I even use this information? Which again, if you're using it to generate an idea for your like kid's college essay, it might be fine. I mean, might have plagiarism concerns if you don't cite it, but it might be fine in terms of just like reliability. If you're using it in your security shop, you might not be fine to allow an agent to make, confidence agnostic decisions there. If you are using it for things where you are inputting it or like giving it injects that have data that is sensitive, even those questions themselves can be sensitive. If you look at financials and other folks, knowing what people are asking it from your company could be a security concern. There's a lot of ways in which, like, I think getting caught up in the content itself and the possibilities. I don't know. On that note, if you are an AI nerd, you can look up. There's a famous escape called Poem. But anyway, like the point isn't that we're going to perfect AI or that AI is going to steal all our jobs or that it is going to be totally unusable. I think, the point is that you should have a framework, kind of repeatable, attestable, defensible approach. And as CISOs, again, I did mention, I think we should just expect that there's going to be shadow AI, the way that there are shadow IT and shadow apps, like that you're going to have the AI you know about and that you can guardrail and that you can, and there's a company I advise called Encrypt AI that does this for enterprises, for example, where you can say, I want my employees to be able to ask about finance. And they can do that, and it'll help select a model that has some of the least flaws in that particular realm. But at some rate, you're doing a judgment call here. And I think that's true for every CISO determination. Like, we are not out here to try to be perfect. We are out here to try to buy down the risk. And it's really a business proposition, just like it is in anything else. And I am the last person to say don't use AI. I think everyone acknowledges that there are really important and interesting use cases. And frankly, if it is taking jobs at all, I want it to be taking those jobs because I want humans to be doing higher order work. I want us to be doing the creative stuff and not just having the robots do the vacuuming. I want the robots to be doing all the boring cleanup of the internet that we can do, but we'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach. Let's kind of segue into that, and we'll come back onto the idea of what we're talking about with this AI. But yeah, I remember talking to people who were concerned, oh, AI is going to take my job, and they list the 10 most likely jobs to be losing at, which are repetitive tasks, whether it happens to be accounting or something like that. And I said, AI is never going to take your job. It's somebody who knows how to use AI better than you know how to use AI is going to take your job, because they're going to be able to outperform you in terms of productivity and being able to go ahead and get the work done. Thoughts about that?
Maybe, or maybe you just get a different type of job. You get to focus on other stuff, right?
Yeah.
My favorite cybersecurity related use case for AI is content reviewing of like, this is one of the tough things that I had to work on at AWS. I got my career started working in anti-CSAM, so child sexual abuse material, and counterterrorism work. There are manual reviewers who have to go through Facebook and see puppies being tortured and children being abused. And if an AI can do a lot of that, like, that's good for everyone.
And it's not going to get nightmares either.
It is seriously the stuff of nightmares. You know what I mean? And we could also get through that content in a faster manner. It can be more efficient. It's the best thing for society for that kind of review to be done, at least, to the degree it can be by a computer, which, a lot of the websites that are doing that type of work say that they anticipate that they'll be able to scale up significantly. So that's just one example of the types of work that I think AI is really good for and good at. On the other hand, like, remember that AI is never it's not it doesn't come up with spontaneous innovation. It doesn't actually have feelings. It can't fall in love. There are things about being human that, for all our, the flaws of being human are what make us also good at sort of falling into interesting ideas or coming up with something out of nothing. And AI is never going to steal Peter Thiel's word, go 0 to 1 with innovation.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because if you look at the construct of an LLM, and I've covered this a couple times in prior episodes, really it's just a statistical prediction model from token to token to token, where tokens are typically words in an LLM. They could be phrases, and they're working on other things. But as the illustration I use in my presentations, I'll put up the word peanut and say, give me the next word that you can think of after peanut. Peanut butter is a lot of people. And peanut butter what? People say, well, peanut butter jelly. It says, no, there's a word in between. Okay, peanut butter and jelly, peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And what those are is it's probably the most probable path from that starting word. And so it creates coherence. Now, if you say, go ahead and change the next one, go to a less likely one, you might have peanut brittle, and then you might get to peanut allergies, and finally might be peanut the squirrel. And what we find out is that what some people say, hey, we designed this model and it's not really creating things out of thin air. What it's doing is just putting together low probability connections that we as humans would have rejected outright before we ever got anywhere near following that trail down. And as we come up with creativity is often thinking about things that nobody thought of before. But back to our idea of AI, and you'd mentioned the idea of dirty digital jobs as a good role for AI, things that people shouldn't have to look at but need to be looked at. And I kind of like that. And I think that's
and it could even be manualness of trouble tickets. It could be the fact, so like, for example, at AWS, increasingly we were having robots resolve those either because they could, we had already programmed it that they can make this judgment call. So if Merritt meets these 3 criteria, we can say, yes, we'll grant her the permission to that. We're going to watch her behavior, but we'll let her have access to that sensitive document. But also because they could then also sense when it had been remediated and close the ticket. So you have people who would have otherwise had to do 14 interactions with every trouble ticket. And by the way, as manual as trouble ticketing is to this day, I don't know a single mature shop that isn't captive to a trouble ticketing system. That basically you can call it AI, but it's really bots under the hood. ML has been around for a long time. Are serverless functions that are running, that when things meet a criteria, then they can fire. And it's both more efficient and effective, allows your security team to scale up. So I'm not just talking about kind of edge cases like CSAM for these kinds of security related work. Fraud though is inherently and abuse are inherently scalable things when the other side is using bots. So the security team should be using automated approaches as well. This in my view, this can make lives better. I have another company I advise named Andesite that does SOC resources and transformation around this, basically allowing folks to like take what might have been a 700-page report about a new threat actor and say, query it and say, is this in my environment? And then get like a natural language answer that points to where we can pay attention. It is for the analyst. It's for a human. I mean, ultimately, my concern or my firm conviction is that we're still like building tech by humans for humans. At the end of the day, no one cares about AI unless it's actually in service of something human. And so I think as we get there, we should allow it to serve us, but, guardrail against it when it stops serving us.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point there we talk about, as you had mentioned, the idea of scalable abuse. The idea that's another role for AI is it has, for lack of a better word, democratized some of the capabilities that were typically reserved for more sophisticated threat actors, where if you can break those guardrails off somehow and say, give me a Python script that will go ahead and do this, or here, examine this code and find a flaw in it that is exploitable, which is great if you're on a red team and you're under a signed contract and you're going to reveal all your information to your customer to help them build up a better defense. But we, of course, know that the danger is not the tool, but it's the use of the tool. So thoughts about that going forward? Are you going to see that these guardrails that you say currently were designed, as you had mentioned, keeping AI in the service of humans so that they don't go ahead and become Skynet and take over the world? But those guardrails need to be granularized a little bit more. And then how do you go ahead with open LLMs and downloadable tools where you're no longer beholden to one gigantic NVIDIA farm going ahead and burning up a nuclear power plant's total output for a year to create a base for an LLM, which is why we don't get new updates every week in something like ChatGPT. But someone who can say, I could live with an abbreviated version. How do we, if you will, put controls on that? Or is the very nature of AI such that we can never really control that genie once the genie's out of the bottle?
So I'm going to start by pulling on a small thing you mentioned there, but that actually I think is going to be a trend, or whatever. Trend is the wrong word because it's not going anywhere. Going to be a continuing intersection is security and environmental concerns, which will dovetail with geopolitical. So as we look ahead to a new administration, we already have a chip shortage. We're going to continue to see supply chain considerations. Just knowing who you're doing business with, even as an enterprise today, is a challenge. I think the SBOM, the Software Bill of Materials, attempts have been well-intended, but hardly comprehensive. And I don't think that even a comprehensive SBOM really, that's a point in time. It created awareness around this as an issue, but it's certainly not some kind of panacea.
But it also doesn't tell you if Bobby, the intern, wrote some of that code because the SBOM focusing on that. What's your biggest weakness?
I think the point of SBOMs was that so that folks could better understand what was in there exactly, do kind of like a, the equivalent of like an x-ray in the medical world or something. But like, as everyone knows, x-rays don't see the tissue, they see the bones. And it's, you know what I mean? Like, you can, for every metaphor, it will break down. But, there's a lot of ways in which just like a static point in time, even if it was accurate, wouldn't necessarily be the right thing, because these vendor relationships, and everyone, by the way, is doing business with lots of entities that they may or may not even recognize. Again, knowing what you have in your environment is a really good start. And the CISOs I talk to are conscious of this. They are, working on getting a better understanding of who their up and downstream vendors are. But ultimately, as we saw with SolarWinds, right? Like, part of the concern around the intrusion that happened there, which, by the way, was a nation state level one. So again, we come back to geopolitics on some level, motivated by an economy that's fueled through some of these sustainability concerns that I share. I think part of this is issues intersecting around this, and it doesn't mean that it's a yes/no button. It's actually, unfortunately, it's the real world where it's a much more textured and nuanced response. But I think responsible CISOs are considering sustainability and security to go hand in hand. and that folks need to make decisions. And this was always true economically, right? You might want to life cycle your data retention. You might want to use spot instances so that you're not paying for warm or hot compute or for reserved instances unless you really need them. Caching things at the edge. They're like, it not only is more effective, it's also just better as an architectural practice, like for both the environment and for your security. But I think I'm thinking of another. There's an open source protocol called Bacalao, by the way, that does this where and their commercial part is expand. So you never move the underlying data. You just extract the analytics. It's better for security and privacy, but it also has performance capabilities, right? So anyway, the point is that a lot of times these performance capabilities from a security and sustainability perspective, I think will continue to intertwine. But as we see in a new administration trying to get stuff done, we might run into some of the same frustrations that practitioners have around seeing regulations or other enforcement actions go in or out without getting all the unintended consequences. So GDPR, for example, and of course, like GDPR was Europe, but any American company that is doing business with, EU nationals or doesn't know whether they are or not would be subject to it. They required a higher granularity on the data and being kept, tagged to an individual for that right to forget. And so it actually had a lot of unintended consequences, even though it was a data privacy statute. So, I think there's a lot of work here. And when it comes, your other part of the question, if I'm remembering correctly, was around this sort of like, is AI something that like once the genie is out of the bottle, we can't put it back in? Like, no, I actually think if anything, AI reminds me of like, when cyber became the new term and they were like, we're going to need new cyber fraud statutes and new cyber stalking statutes and new cyber. And it was like, no, it's just fraud or it's stalking or it's, you know what I mean? Like it's an app.
We're going to need a bigger regulation.
Yeah, we're going to need new cyber banking. It was like, no, it's just banking. It's just going to look a little different now. You know what I mean? And I think that we're going to see that with AI.
That's a good point because and to just kind of wrap up my thoughts on the SBOM is it's necessary but not sufficient. What do I mean by that? I'd mentioned that, for example, that Bobby the intern wrote a bunch of code that's never going to show up in the SBOM. It's just going to mean you have vulnerable code. But it's really useful if, for example, you had an open SSL library that was inside a third-party package. You read about a 9.8 CVSS problem with that library. You say, oh, I guess that's in there because one of the first things that I have to answer as a CISO when a major announcement like that comes out is, are we vulnerable? And typically what I've been doing is like, okay, let me call vendor 1, let me call vendor 2, vendor 3, because I got to ask them, do you have this library in your code? As compared to being able to go ahead and let me consult the SBOMs and things like that. So we're focusing really on...
But also remember that the CVE scores come from MITRE, who in 1999 set it up with 9,999 entries, because that seemed like a reasonable number that we would never have more than that.
And 640K for your PC back in the 80s, yeah.
Exactly. And now we are discovering them all the time, every day. And some of them don't matter. And the CVSS scores sometimes I find misalign with actual severity. And, it's all like, I think the future. So, and this can be our other quote is like, the future will not be televised. It will be contextualized. We need to actually understand the heuristics of the behaviors. What industry are you in? What CVE? What's critical to you will matter depending on the expectations you have for the assets you have and the behaviors you're expecting to see.
Yeah, and I think as we've gone from CVSS 2 to 3 to 4, and then maybe on to something in the future, there is some tuning that's going on with that. So it's still useful.
There are, and of course, like the day that Log4j came out, when I was at AWS, all of the services that were actually built with Lambdas instead of EC2, we could patch.
Yeah. And
so it also depends on how you're building.
But you mentioned AWS. It brought up something we talked about before the show, and that was, what do you look at going forward? And you'd mentioned that Jeff Bezos said, focus not on all the new changes, all this upcoming new technology, but you ought to focus on what is going to stay the same. So could you elaborate a little bit about that and talk about how that's going to help us in 2025 looking at cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I think, folks are always wanting to look ahead, and I think that's just human. I don't think it's just technologists. But I think that, there is a famous sort of Jeff Bezos truism where he said, people are always asking, what's going to be new? What's going to be different next year? And I ask, what's going to stay the same? And so one of the things that he came to was like, consumers will always want lower prices. They will want higher performance. They will want choice. People just like that, even though in the end, they may just pick the medium t-shirt size every time, like they like the idea of choice. So I think that in security world, there's a couple of things that we can expect to see the same, right? We're going to see ransomware and other kind of bad behavior, I'll call it, continue. Although I think it used to be more in the world of like low-level criminal gangs, and now we're seeing nation states engaging in it as well. We have two hot wars happening in the world as of today, and they need to finance those. And they are entities that, engage sometimes in, like you see Russian entities and North Korean entities and Iranian entities engaging in ransomware, like because they have to put the money in their coffers. So I think we're going to continue to see that sort of intersection between criminality and nation state behavior. I think from an American perspective, we're going to see an administration that sort of wants to demonstrate it's doing something. And so they're going to have a new SEC, right? We've seen a lot of activity from SEC and DOJ around the role of the CISO here, sort of shaping where responsibilities lie. Again, my view, while it is probably less sexy than it is practical, is that as a CISO, you need to have a reasonable, attestable, defensible approach to your, reporting or to your, use of AI. They don't expect you to be perfect, but when you have that bad day and they come on site, the other rule is don't lie to the feds. Remember that Martha Stewart didn't go to prison for her behavior. She went for lying. Tim Brown from SolarWinds, the charges that they brought. And by the way, I am empathetic to many CISOs, including Tim and Joe Sullivan, who came under fire just because this is a tough job. But just in terms of practical considerations, the reason that Tim came under fire was that he misrepresented, at least their allegation is that he misrepresented the maturity of his security program. I think that using this as an opportunity for CISOs to, get that seat at the table, make sure that they actually enforce the policies that they are pretending to have in place. I say that with a laugh because obviously yes, of course you have them in place, but you know what I mean? Like actually doing the best intentions that you have. I think those are all trends that I anticipate have been true for the last year and will be true for the next year.
Well, every year I sit down, usually it's around the last week of December when all my consulting jobs kind of tend towards zero and I've actually got a little bit of time to stop and think. And so each year I put together a list of predictions. I think my best set of predictions were for 2022, where I got 6 out of 7 right. And this is something I did in December of 2021.
Well, it's all about the framing, I guess.
It is. So here are my predictions I wrote a year ago for 2024. Let's see how we did here. I got my little slide up here. CISOs are...
One last one for me would be the one that we talked about before, which is just that attackers are going to continue to walk in the front door. Yeah. So expect credential compromise, that it relates to the ransomware point, but basically they're not, I don't anticipate there will be open source issues like Log4j. There's always going to be a next one. However, for the most part, folks aren't burning 0 days. They are getting in through misconfigurations and through credentials.
Okay. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. It's because 0 days are rare and they're expensive and they're like milk, not like wine. If you don't use them, eventually somebody else discovers them and they get patched. So here's the first prediction I had for 2024. Let's see how I did. CISOs are big buyers of liability and D&O insurance. As a CISO, do you have either liability or D&O insurance?
So it's interesting. Yes, I negotiated as part of my entrance package, and I am seeing CISOs do that more. Okay. But when you take a CISO job, you get a lawyer.
You need to do that.
You know what I mean? Just to help you frame it. But you also get an executive package instead of what, 5 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe you got the title, but with no like you got all the accountability and none of the authority to actually execute on the stuff that you were supposed to be doing. And by the way, the minute that they had a breach, they'd get rid of you. Now I would say it's much more aligned with like, I mean, I report directly to the CEO too. So, I mean, like the point is I am okay with having the accountability as long as I have the tools to do my job.
That makes good sense. Number 2, I had more CISO lawsuits, but few convictions.
I saw more enforcement on the regulatory side than lawsuits, I would say. But I mean, I think it's right. I think that remember that Joe Sullivan was convicted. He just wasn't sentenced to any prison time.
Right.
We're kind of threading this needle. What I saw with so the first SEC 8K filing was North Face's parent company. Do you remember this? December 18th of last year.
Yep.
So the day the statutory requirement went into effect, regulatory requirement went into effect. And they said, we're a real retailer. This is the holiday season. Yes, it is likely to have a material impact was the definition. Remember that the NDC is looking out for shareholders. That's their bottom line, is they're interested. Every filing since then, I believe that I've seen, they said, we don't know if it'll have a material impact, but we're just going to file a report just in case.
And we'll let somebody else decide where that threshold ought to be.
Well, and that's the thing is, let's see how enforcement goes, because if an enforcement, if an SEC panel then says, yeah, you knew it was going to be, and you lied about it, you know what I mean? Like, I think right now we're still waiting for that other half of the hammer or whatever, for the other shoe to drop, and we'll find out.
And so what we're doing is we're doing these Schrodinger 8Ks where we know and we don't know. And we have to wait until some time, can open up and see, is the cat still doing okay? But out of an abundance of caution, and this is my advice also to executives and to CISOs, is that if there's any question, file. Now, there's a concern there. When you file, it turns out that the other trend I'm starting to see as you go back and look through them, and I haven't subjected them to taking an AI, feeding all those into there, shove it in there and say, how specific or general are these? My observation is the trend tends to be a lot more general. We'll do hand waving and things such as that. We're not going to say this particular bucket or this Lambda function or this event or this database or whatever was compromised through this technology. First of all, you don't have time, because within 4 days, 72 hours, whatever, you don't know exactly whatever. It's going to take you weeks, if not months, to totally.
Maybe. I mean, I think they know. I think they're just not no one's holding their feet to the fire right now. And by they, I mean we, because this is CISOs, right? So I categorize myself in that. I wouldn't overshare with my regulator either. If it, we're going to have the dance, because if the regulator comes back and says, you disclose but not fully enough, then I think, then your lawyers get involved and they say, you're going to have to clarify in your next rulemaking, it turns into a conversation, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let me try the next one. Companies try to use AI instead of security consultants. Do we hit that in 2024? And will we hit that in 2025? More use of AI and less use of security consultants?
No, I think I see both. So I think actually, I do agree that sort of like workforce augmentation efforts have changed over the last year, and what you would hire someone for might change. I see a lot of VCISO work, I think in part because it's just like an odd market right now where folks are being cautious about how they handle their security practices, and I haven't seen a robust trend, but I've seen folks sort of trying to take baby steps instead of taking a full step. And I think that even the CISO role, right, is one that looks different at different organizations. But no, I don't see folks using AI instead. I would say, if anything, folks are they might be hiring security consultants to put arms around the AI that they want to, they are trying to reckon with AI, but I don't see one displacing the other.
Got it. Okay, next couple we might have already covered. AI-generated fraud will skyrocket. And shadow...
For that one, I actually think is also just true and I rarely give personal advice on the security lens because my view is enterprise security. Like it's the type of security work that is just creating paved roads and getting your developers to do the secure things. And it's not like, is your grandfather going to fall for this scheme? However, the use of AI for personal, fraud targeted at humans, individuals, is extremely high and it's extremely effective. So,
Okay, so I'll take a win on that one because I didn't qualify it.
yeah,
Shadow AI will create hidden vulnerabilities. I think we've already talked about shadow AI, and that was kind of the new
absolutely.
term.
And I don't even think they're hidden. I think it's like there's just not, unless you have a mechanistic approach to how you would know what you have and how you're gonna know what folks are entering and what they're taking to your AI outputs to use for. It's shadow, and it's shadow in your knowledge that it exists, and then it's also shadow in your applications and use cases.
And the reason I call it hidden vulnerability is that if I don't know the information that my employees are exporting out to these public or these external LLMs and the like, then I really don't know what's been exposed until, for example, it was at Samsung, someone had said they uploaded a whole bunch of code saying, can you optimize this code? Well, guess what? You just made that code open source. Next one was AI-enabled companies, I put that in quotes, will suffer LLM attacks, basically either through poisoning or some other way of being able to get people who, some companies that overly depend on an LLM are going to get careless and casual with it, and they're going to make bad choices because they didn't put a human in the loop to fully check everything.
Even if you had a human in the loop, you wouldn't necessarily know. I think this is like the scream that no one hears because we don't actually see all of the ways in which folks are actually using those outputs from your AI, and you don't know. It's one reason why I advocate for employers to allow AI, but guardrail it, both technically and through policies, like uppercase P and lowercase p policies, because they're going to use it anyway. Do you really want them uploading something on their personal device? And then now you have, but a lot of this is, it comes back to your shadow AI point, or really shadow apps in general, but especially given the interoperability. And now, like, they're going to, like I was saying, I mean, would you know, so not just like your Microsoft Copilot, but would you know about every over permission share drive link that someone like it actually is set, the permissions are set to be open to the world? Like, how would you know about that unless you have a ritualistic way, which is, one thing that we do at Rico, but it's also, it still requires you to go clean those up. Like you have information, you then can track behaviors. You also then need to get your core business work done. And how do you do that in a way that is, it's kind of refined, that allows you the beauty of those kind of heuristics. Now that you can know things with an API call, you also have to go do the work, and it's going to look different, but you have to go do that security work.
Mm-hmm. Well, good insight as well. Now, as we're getting close to the end of the show here, any last thoughts or ideas that we might want to wrap up with looking forward to 2025 and beyond?
Well, I am always happy to engage with folks. You can find me on Twitter at Merritt Baer. Send me a note. I'm happy to have you share my information if folks want a copy of that framework. Like I said, I'm not saying it for like consultants to go.
I'm going to ask for it too, because I'd love to see what the 60 CISOs are thinking when you get them all in the same room.
Like for practitioners to start using it before it comes out in print, I'm happy to give to you. And, this will be an ongoing conversation. I think a lot of what we were discussing today is actually really interesting. We're going to have this conversation as a community, and I mean that as security practitioners, but also as a nation, as a world. Like part of the beauty of tech is deciding the world you want to live in.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very good insight. And I think that the world we like to live in hopefully is going to be hospitable to what it is that we want to accomplish from a positive perspective. We understand there will be bad actors out there. They're going to leverage some of this technology going forward. As you had indicated, probably more on the personal than at the enterprise level, are we going to see some of these AI-sponsored attacks? Although there are going to be some capabilities that are going to go out to lower level practitioners simply because we have made available to them all this knowledge through an AI model that typically required specialized knowledge on behalf of your people and your programmers. So we'll see how 2025 turns out. Maybe we'll circle back in a year and we'll take a look at some of these predictions. And as they say, end of the year, I'm going to try to come up with my own little prediction list, which I don't have in front of me yet, but we'll see how that goes. Meanwhile,
Yeah, we don't have to wait a year. Why don't we come back in a little bit, see how we're doing, and
sounds good. Yeah, we'll do it again. This is fun. So anyway, thank you very much for our audience out here listening to CISO Tradecraft. Thank you for being part of our audience. If you like what we have to say, please go ahead and either follow us. If you're not following us already, make sure you follow us on LinkedIn. But also, we've got a Substack newsletter out there as well. We're also on YouTube. Go ahead and look for us there as well. You're also going to get additional content because we do a lot more than podcasts by just following us on LinkedIn, and then you can either look for me, G. Mark Hardy, or the CISO Tradecraft itself. Merritt, thank you very much for being part of this show. I think it's been wonderful. I have really enjoyed this, and I've learned some stuff, and I hope the audience has too. So thank you very much for being a part of CISO Tradecraft. If you have other people that are needing to improve their CISO skills, please go ahead and point them here as well. So thank you for listening or watching. And until next time, this is your host, G. Mark Hardy, and stay safe out there.